On Mother's Day, my daughter handed me a card and asked me to read it out loud. I thought it would be something sweet, something loving. After all, it was Mother's Day, the day to celebrate mothers. The sun was streaming through the tall living room windows, spilling golden light onto the carpet where my grandchildren were sitting. Their little faces shone with excitement, waiting for me to open the envelope. My daughter stood nearby, holding the card with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My son-in-law leaned against the wall, glancing down at his phone. I barely noticed him at first. For a fleeting moment I felt the warmth of family. I felt lucky. Lucky to have a daughter. Lucky to have grandchildren. Lucky to have people around me who I hoped loved me. I picked up the card and with hands that trembled slightly began reading aloud. Roses are red. Violets are blue. The next words hit me like a hammer. You're a burden. No one wants you here. Your time has passed. Maybe it's time you live somewhere else. I froze. My voice faltered. The envelope slipped from my hands and landed softly on the coffee table. The room was silent for 3 long, unbearable seconds. Then Daniel laughed, a loud, mocking sound that seemed to echo through the room. Emily covered her mouth, trying to hide a smile, but I saw her eyes sparkle with the same cruel amusement. Even the kids, confused and uncertain, giggled, sensing the adults' laughter. Did you see her face, Daniel? Emily said. You should have taken a picture. Tears filled my eyes. I felt my chest tighten as the words sank in. I had spent my entire life giving this family everything. My time, my energy, my love. And now they treated me like a joke. It's just a joke, Mom, Emily continued. Don't take it so seriously. You're always so dramatic. Daniel walked over, picked up the card and smirked. Yeah, Grace, we were just playing. But, lately you've been too present. Maybe it's time to consider other options. Other options? I whispered, my voice trembling. What do you mean? Well, Emily said, sitting back on the couch with casual indifference, there are some really good senior living communities. Places where you could be more comfortable. With people your age. Senior living. The word sounded like a death sentence. My own daughter, my family, they wanted to discard me like old furniture. I felt numb. My eyes sought the grandchildren. One of them, barely 8, tugged at my hand. Grandma, why are you crying? Before I could answer, Emily pulled him away. Come on, sweetie. Grandma's fine. She's just being sentimental. I walked toward the door, holding myself together as best I could. I should just go, I whispered. Emily didn't even stand. Hey, Mom. We'll call you later. That night, sitting in my empty house, I cried until there were no more tears. And yet, in that despair, something awakened inside me. Something that had been dormant for decades. It was time for my family to learn the truth about who Grace really was. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one where I had held Emily as a baby. Memories came back like an old film rolling in slow motion. It all started when I was 29 years old. Emily's father had abandoned us when she was 3. One morning he simply disappeared. He left a note on the kitchen table. I can't do this life. I'm sorry. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. I remember holding Emily close that night. Her little body shook with sobs. Where's Daddy? She asked. Daddy had to go far away, my love, I whispered. But I promise you'll never go without anything. I worked double shifts at a textile mill for 15 years. My hands bore calluses from sewing uniforms late into the night. Every extra cent I earned went toward Emily's education. When she told me she wanted to study nursing, I sold my mother's jewelry, everything of value I had. Mommy, are you sure? Emily asked, worried. My love, I said firmly, your education is more important than anything I own. During her 5 years of university, I cleaned offices on weekends, often returning home exhausted. But when I saw Emily studying at the dining table, determination in her eyes, I knew it was worth it. The day of her graduation, I cried with pride. We did it, Mommy, she whispered, hugging me tight. This wouldn't have been possible without you. Later, Emily met Daniel. At first, I liked him, polite, hardworking, seemingly genuine. When they got married, I paid half the wedding, $12,000 I had saved for years. Mom, this is too much, Emily protested as I handed her the check. Nonsense, I said, smiling. This is your day. You deserve it. When they bought their first home, I gave them $25,000 for the down payment. Seeing them happy filled me with satisfaction, even though it drained my savings. Then came the grandchildren, two little lights in my life. I became their free babysitter, walking 6 blocks every morning, making breakfast, bathing them, taking them to the park. Emily would come home from work and smile. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom. You're an angel." But slowly something shifted. Gratitude became rare. My advice was dismissed. My presence was considered interference. "Grace, we're the parents here," Daniel said sharply one day. The first time I felt the sting, I stayed silent, thinking perhaps I was being too sensitive. But the comments continued. "You should rest more at home. You've been confusing the kids with vitamins again. You're always too present." Yet I kept going. Kept helping. I kept giving. 2 years ago, when Daniel lost his job, I began sending them $500 every month so they wouldn't lose their home. They promised it was temporary. Daniel found a new job months later, but the payments never stopped. Little by little, I became the silent provider. Always there to solve their problems, yet no longer included in important decisions. A year ago, Emily organized a birthday dinner for Daniel. I only found out by chance when one of the grandchildren mentioned it. "Why wasn't I invited?" I asked. "Oh, Mom, it was a small thing. We thought you'd be bored," Emily said. Photos appeared online. 20 people, including relatives I knew well. Everyone was invited, except me. That night I cried silently. But I kept hoping things would improve. Foolishly, I kept giving, kept helping, kept hoping. The weeks after that Mother's Day card replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. Every laugh, every mocking glance, every subtle comment from Emily or Daniel that I had previously brushed off now cut deeper than ever. I started to remember all the small moments when my love had been met with indifference, my generosity with entitlement. It was Emily's oldest son's birthday 6 months ago. I had arrived early to help decorate the living room. I carried bags of balloons, streamers, and a cake I had baked myself, frosting delicately shaped into stars and moons because that's what he loved. When I knocked, Daniel opened the door with a look that drained me of energy before I even stepped inside. "Grace, the party doesn't start until 3. Why are you so early?" "I wanted to help with the decorations," I said, smiling, trying to make the best of it. "We don't need any help," Daniel replied curtly. "Emily has everything under control." Through the door I could see Emily and a friend, Brenda, arranging balloons. Brenda was only 3 years younger than me, but I could already feel her eyes watching, judging. I stepped back quietly. The birthday boy ran to hug me, asking why I was so quiet. I mumbled something about being tired. Emily quickly intervened. "He's fine, Mom. Don't be dramatic." And so I stood in the corner, a silent spectator at my own grandson's birthday. My contributions ignored, my presence minimized. I had spent years doing everything for this family. Baking cakes, fixing dinners, helping with school projects, reading bedtime stories, driving the kids to their activities, managing emergencies, lending money, fixing cars, helping with the house. But none of it was acknowledged anymore. Then came Christmas. I had gone through the effort of buying meaningful gifts for everyone. A bicycle for the oldest grandson, a tablet for the youngest, a perfume for Emily, a power tool Daniel had mentioned wanting. I spent nearly $3,000 that year. On Christmas Eve I arrived at their home, my arms full of gifts, hearts brimming with love. The children ran toward me excitedly. But Emily quickly called them over. "Kids, put Grandma's presents under the tree with the others. We'll open everything together tomorrow." When the gifts were opened, no one mentioned who had given what. My gifts were swallowed by the chaos, barely noticed, and the thanks that were offered felt automatic, empty, and dismissive. That year I also gave Emily a family heirloom, a pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. It was delicate, valuable, a piece of our history. "Mom, it's really pretty," Emily said, barely inspecting it. "I don't wear much jewelry. Maybe save it for when the kids are older." She handed the box back without even opening the clasp. My heart sank. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the care, the thought, the legacy I wanted to pass down. And it was dismissed without a second thought. Then 2 months ago I came down with the flu. A week of high fever, shaking chills, inability to even get out of bed. I called Emily to ask for help, for a moment of care. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice sharp, "we're so busy right now. Daniel has a big project, I'm on a double shift. Can't you ask a neighbor?" But it wasn't just any flu. It was 102 degrees fever, body aching, every movement a struggle. I had to rely on Mrs. Johnson, my 82-year-old neighbor, to bring me soup and remind me to take my medication. Someone I barely knew showed more concern than my own daughter. By the time I recovered and returned to their home, no one asked how I had been. No one called. My sickness had simply been an inconvenience, a reminder that I was too present. That night in my living room I sat staring at the table. I started thinking about all the money I had quietly given over the years. $25,000 down payment for their first home. $12,000 for their wedding. $500 per month for 2 years during Daniel's unemployment. $12,000. $2,000 for kids' computers. $4,000 for car repairs. $8,000 for kitchen remodeling. Hundreds of smaller amounts, totaling another $4,000. The sum of 5 years' contributions, $67,000. And yet, in their eyes, I was nothing more than a burden. But the cruel reality of my life was about to intersect with a secret that had been mine for decades. Something I had never mentioned to anyone. My mother, before she passed, had left me information about a property in Nassau, Bahamas. I had inherited it when I turned 70. It was a modest 3-bedroom condo by the beach, rented out for decades. I had left it untouched. The money accumulated quietly in an account that no one knew about. Not just that. My late Aunt Lucille, who had no children, had left me all her wealth. Investments, bonds, certificates of deposit. I had kept it private, never touched it, living modestly on my Social Security check. All in all, I had nearly $400,000 hidden from the family, who assumed I lived in poverty, dependent on them. They didn't know that for years, I had been quietly funding their comfortable lifestyle out of love, not need. Holding the cruel Mother's Day card, I realized something fundamental. Their laughter, their dismissiveness, their entitlement, they thought I was weak. That my love and devotion meant I would never leave. But they were wrong. Something inside me shifted that night. I started planning, not out of anger but out of clarity. Out of self-respect. Out of the realization that my life belonged to me, not to people who treated me as disposable. The first step was financial independence. I logged into my online banking for the first time in months. I canceled the $500 monthly transfers. I closed the joint emergency account. I began moving my investments into a main account that only I could access. Next, I went to my lawyer, Mr. Franklin, who had handled all the family legal affairs for decades. I explained everything. New will, new distribution of my assets, conditions for the grandchildren's inheritance, everything. I then made a decision that would change my life forever. I booked a plane ticket to Nassau. For the first time in decades, I was planning something for me, not for anyone else. Before leaving, I wrote letters to Emily and Daniel. Letters that explained my choices, my realizations, my strength. Emily, your mother is not a burden. Your mother is not an ATM. Your love must be earned, not taken for granted. Daniel, the support you have relied on for years was given freely. That freedom is now mine to reclaim. I left the letters on the table, knowing they would be discovered in my absence. For the first time in years, I felt alive, empowered, and free. And as I packed my suitcase for Nassau, the fear that had haunted me for decades dissolved. My life was mine. Finally mine. The flight to Nassau felt surreal. For the first time in years, the anticipation coursed through me, replacing the old, familiar ache of guilt and obligation. I had spent my life on other people's schedules, their problems, their comfort. Now for the first time, everything was for me. I flew first class, a small indulgence I had never allowed myself before. The champagne, the wide leather seats, the attentive service. It felt almost like a dream. I sat by the window watching the ocean beneath me, imagining the life I had earned but had never lived. When the plane landed, the warmth of the Bahamian sun kissed my face. I collected my luggage and took a taxi to the condo. The streets were lined with palms swaying gently in the breeze, pastel-colored buildings reflecting the late afternoon light. The sound of waves crashing on the nearby shore mingled with distant laughter from tourists. Life moving at a rhythm I hadn't known in decades. The condo itself was modest but elegant. 3 bedrooms, spacious living area, balcony overlooking the turquoise sea. It had been rented to long-term tenants, and the property management company had kept it in immaculate condition. As I stepped inside, the smell of clean linen and polished wood reminded me of how long this place had been waiting for me. I wandered from room to room, touching surfaces, imagining the possibilities. I could host friends, I could paint, I could write, I could simply be. It had been decades since I had allowed myself such freedom. I sat on the balcony, the wind brushing my face, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Joy without expectation. It was a quiet, deep, overwhelming sensation. A sense of peace. A sense of power. I spent the next few days organizing the condo, changing furniture arrangements and making small improvements. Each action, each choice reinforced a growing truth. I did not need anyone's approval to live fully. I did not need to wait for recognition or for permission or for thanks. I was enough. But amidst the beauty and the freedom, my mind kept returning to the letters I had left behind in my home. Emily and Daniel would discover them soon. They would read about the inheritance, about the $500 monthly transfers, the joint account, the new will. They would realize finally that the woman they had treated as weak and dependent had all along been stronger than they could imagine. I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. They had been given every chance to value me, to appreciate me, to love me as their mother and grandmother. They had failed. The responsibility for that failure was theirs, not mine. I explored the local town, walking along cobblestone streets, stopping at markets, tasting tropical fruits I had never allowed myself before. I met a few friendly locals who welcomed me warmly, curious about the new neighbor. I told them I was here to retire, to enjoy life, to live fully, and the nods of understanding I received were validating in a way I hadn't experienced in decades. On the third evening, I watched the sunset from the balcony, the sky painted with shades of orange, pink, and violet. I reflected on my life, on the years of giving, the moments of humiliation, the times I had stayed silent instead of asserting my worth. I realized that my liberation wasn't just financial. It was emotional, spiritual, existential. I had reclaimed my right to live on my own terms. And yet I was not finished. I had a plan, not just for myself but for Emily and Daniel. They needed to understand that they had lost more than money or convenience. They had lost respect, love, and the presence of a woman who had given everything for them. I opened my laptop and drafted a detailed letter to each of them, expanding upon the first notes I had left at home. I described each sacrifice I had made, every gift given without expectation, every moment of patience and kindness met with indifference. I reminded them of the Mother's Day humiliation, the ignored birthdays, the Christmas gifts they never acknowledged. I explained clearly that all financial support would cease, that the will had been changed, and that the grandchildren's trust would only be accessible if they cultivated genuine, meaningful relationships with me, not out of obligation. Writing these letters, I felt a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. For decades I had been invisible. Now I would be seen, not as a burden but as a person of worth, autonomy, and strength. I spent the following days in Nassau establishing routines for myself. Mornings were spent walking along the beach, collecting seashells and breathing in the salt air. Afternoons were for reading, writing, and planning new hobbies. I even started a small garden on the balcony, planting flowers and herbs I had long admired from afar. Each day I felt my energy return. The heaviness that had weighed on my shoulders for so many years, the weight of unacknowledged sacrifices, of constant giving without reciprocity, gradually lifted. I laughed aloud, sometimes at nothing, sometimes at the thought of Emily and Daniel discovering the letters. The laughter was mine, fully and entirely. I also began to explore investment options for the inheritance I had kept untouched for so long. Consulting with local financial advisors, I diversified my holdings, ensuring that my wealth would grow quietly and securely, independent of anyone who had previously tried to control or exploit it. And as the days passed, I began to plan for the next phase of my life. I would stay in Nassau for a while, enjoy my freedom, and immerse myself in a community that valued presence, kindness, and connection. But eventually I would return home, not as the meek, giving mother and grandmother they had known, but as Grace, independent, empowered, and unapologetically alive. The realization was exhilarating. The power of self-respect, of setting boundaries, of claiming one's own life. I had been invisible for decades, yes. But no longer. Grace had finally been seen, not for what she gave but for who she truly was. Back in my hometown, Emily and Daniel returned home after a long day. It was late afternoon and the house was quiet. On the coffee table lay 2 envelopes with my elegant handwriting, letters addressed individually to each of them. Emily spotted hers first. She picked it up curiously, but as soon as she began reading, the corners of her smile faltered. "Wait, what?" she whispered aloud. This can't be real." Daniel, glancing over her shoulder, snatched his own envelope. His eyes widened as he read. His face went pale, his usual smirk replaced by confusion and disbelief. "Grace has stopped all the monthly payments, cancelled the joint account, changed her will, established a trust with conditions for the grandchildren, and she's in Nassau?" The words hit them like a tidal wave. Every gift, every favor, every act of kindness I had quietly done over decades flashed in their minds. They remembered the down payment, the wedding, the car repairs, the school computers, the kitchen remodeling, all of it. And now it was gone. Financial support severed, unclaimed, and replaced with a life I had chosen entirely for myself. Emily tried to speak. "Daniel, she can't do that. We need her. The kids, the money." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. She never told us about the condo in Nassau? The inheritance? Oh, they had never known. They had assumed that I lived modestly on my social security, that every penny they received from me had been mine to spare because I was dependent, weak, and needy. For the first time they realized the truth. I had been the silent provider, the backbone of their comfortable life, and they had treated me as disposable. The children, unaware of the letters, asked why Grandma wasn't calling. Emily and Daniel exchanged uneasy glances. Their guilt, unacknowledged for years, now weighed heavily upon them. Meanwhile, I was in Nassau, watching the sun set over the turquoise waters from my balcony. My letters had done exactly what I had hoped, revealed the truth without me needing to argue or justify myself in person. The power lay in clarity. I had given them knowledge, not confrontation. I allowed myself a moment to revel in freedom. I walked along the beach the next morning, feeling the sand between my toes, letting the ocean breeze wash away the weight of decades. I laughed aloud, knowing that my life for the first time belonged entirely to me. Over the next few days I explored Nassau with curiosity and delight. I discovered small cafes, local markets, and quiet streets lined with vibrant tropical flowers. I made acquaintances, locals who were curious, warm, and welcoming. For the first time, I felt that sense of community that I had always longed for, one not based on obligation but on genuine connection. I spent hours on my balcony writing in a journal I had kept since my 20s. Memories of Emily's childhood, my sacrifices, the humiliations, and the small victories flowed onto the pages. Writing was therapeutic. I poured out decades of emotions, documenting the journey from self-effacement to empowerment. One morning, I received a call from Mrs. Johnson, my elderly neighbor back home. She had discovered my absence but was genuinely concerned. "Grace, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm more than okay," I replied, smiling. "I'm finally living for me." Mrs. Johnson chuckled. "You deserve it, dear. You've given so much, it's about time you took for yourself." Her words warmed me. For years I had been invisible to my own family, but here a stranger, someone who barely knew me, recognized my worth. It felt extraordinary. I realized then that self-respect and freedom were more valuable than anything I had ever given them. Money, time, gifts, they could all be reclaimed, but dignity and love for oneself were priceless and irretrievable once lost. Back at their home, Emily and Daniel began arguing over the letters. "She's gone, Daniel. She's really gone. And she's taken everything," Emily said, voice trembling. Daniel clenched his fists. "We treated her like an ATM, like she was nothing, and we didn't even notice. She's done everything for us, and now we're left with nothing but guilt." Their realization sank in slowly. They understood finally the consequences of their neglect, their indifference, and their cruelty. The grandchildren noticed the tension. They asked why Grandma hadn't called, sensing that something had shifted. Emily and Daniel didn't know how to explain it. The children were confused, and Emily felt a pang of guilt. Her own mother had always been there, yet she had failed to appreciate her. Meanwhile, in Nassau I began organizing the condo. I repainted the rooms, rearranged the furniture, and bought a few local art pieces to brighten the space. Each action reinforced the sense of independence. Every choice was mine and mine alone. I even started a small balcony garden, planting tropical flowers and herbs. The fragrance and colors brought a sense of peace and joy I hadn't felt in decades. Each morning as the sun rose over the ocean, I would tend my garden, sip tea, and reflect on the life I had built, not for anyone else but for myself. For the first time I felt fully awake, fully alive, and fully free. I was no longer Grace the giver, the helper, the emotional ATM. I was Grace the empowered, the independent, the woman who finally valued herself. The days in Nassau became a rhythm of joy and self-discovery. I woke with the sunrise, the ocean breeze brushing my face, and for the first time in decades, I did not wake with worry or obligation. No one depended on me, no one judged me, and no one controlled my time. I explored every corner of the island. The streets of Nassau were vibrant and alive, with pastel buildings and tropical flowers adorning every corner. I discovered cafes tucked away behind bougainvillea, where locals offered smiles and stories over fresh coffee. I wandered through markets, inhaling the scent of spices, fresh fish, and tropical fruits, savoring the freedom to linger wherever I pleased. For the first time in years, I allowed myself hobbies I had long ignored. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at a local community center. My paintings, once abandoned sketches on the margins of my journals, blossomed under the guidance of a patient instructor. The sensation of brush on paper, creating colors that had no purpose but beauty, was intoxicating. I also began journaling every day, documenting memories, reflections, and dreams for the future. I wrote about Emily's childhood, the sacrifices I had made, the humiliation and disregard I had endured, and the power I had finally reclaimed. Writing was therapy, a way to solidify the new Grace emerging from years of suppression. Financially, I felt liberated. My investments, once quiet and invisible, were now active tools of independence. I consulted with local advisors to diversify my portfolio further. The condo's rental income continued, quietly accumulating in a separate account that only I could access. I was fully in control of my life and my wealth. A freedom I had never known, a freedom I had finally earned. I began to meet other residents in Nassau, retirees, artists, and expatriates who had made the island their home. The community was vibrant, curious, and kind. Unlike my family back home, these people valued presence, friendship, and mutual respect. I joined weekly book clubs, attended small gatherings, and even started hosting occasional dinners at my condo. Every conversation, every shared laugh, reinforced that I had finally found a place where I belonged, not because of what I gave but because of who I was. While I thrived, the thought of Emily and Daniel occasionally crossed my mind. The letters were out there. They had been delivered. Soon they would grasp the full scope of my autonomy, my wealth, and my decision to live independently. But I felt no anger. Revenge had never been my goal. The power lay in the choice, in setting boundaries, in demonstrating that respect and love could not be taken for granted. My liberation was complete because it was self-initiated and self-sustained. Occasionally, I allowed myself to imagine the moment Emily or Daniel would reach out, realizing the depth of what they had lost. They might plead, explain, or justify their past behavior. But I knew my response would be measured, firm, and clear. My life was mine and no one could take that away. One afternoon, while tending my balcony garden, I reflected on the transformation. The years of silent sacrifice, the heartbreak of being undervalued, and the moments of humiliation had all culminated in this clarity. I had been invisible to those who should have cherished me, but now I was vividly alive to myself. I had discovered that independence was more than financial. It was emotional. It was social. It was spiritual. It was waking up each morning and knowing that every choice, every step, every breath was mine alone. I also began planning small projects to enhance my life in Nassau. A personal library, a small art studio, and a rooftop garden with a view of the ocean. Each plan reinforced the sense of autonomy and excitement for the future. Evenings were spent on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. I reflected on decades of giving, on years of being treated as a secondary character in my own life. And I realized that while the past could not be undone, the future was a canvas I could paint however I desired. In those moments I felt a sense of profound peace. I was no longer burdened by family expectations or societal judgments. I was free, truly free, to live, to love, and to be the Grace I had always been beneath layers of duty and expectation. I thought about the upcoming years. I imagined trips along the coast, friendships cultivated without obligation, creative projects pursued with joy, and evenings spent simply enjoying the ocean breeze. Every day was mine. Every choice belonged to me. And with that realization, a sense of empowerment grew even stronger. I was Grace. Independent, wealthy, self-respecting, and finally completely alive. Weeks passed in Nassau, and my life settled into a comfortable rhythm of freedom and exploration. I had made the condo truly my own. The balcony garden thrived, filled with hibiscus, bougainvillea, and small herb plants. The scent of the flowers mingled with the ocean breeze, creating a sense of serenity I had never known in decades of domestic service and sacrifice. I discovered local cafes where I became a familiar face. The owners greeted me warmly, asking about my art classes, the garden, or my walks along the beach. Conversations were natural, easy, and genuine. No expectations, no obligations, just connection. I also met other retirees and expatriates who had made Nassau their home. Some had left demanding families behind. Others were seeking creative outlets or a second chance at life. Sharing stories over coffee or during evening walks along the shore, I realized I wasn't alone in my pursuit of happiness. The sense of community and mutual respect nourished my spirit. My art flourished as well. Painting had always been a neglected passion, but here it became a daily ritual. I experimented with watercolors and oils, capturing the colors of the ocean, sunsets, and local streetscapes. Each painting reminded me that life could be beautiful when created deliberately, not just endured. I also began writing letters to myself, documenting reflections, lessons learned, and hopes for the future. Journaling became a form of therapy, reinforcing my identity as someone independent, creative, and fully alive. Back home, Emily and Daniel continued to grapple with the reality of my independence. They had read my letters weeks ago, but now the absence of calls, texts, or visits made the situation painfully clear. Emily paced the living room one afternoon. "Daniel, we messed up. Mom, she's really gone, isn't she?" Daniel slumped into the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "We treated her like she was nothing, and now she has everything. The condo, the money, and she doesn't need us at all." Their guilt was suffocating. For years, they had assumed my dependence, treating my presence and generosity as obligations rather than gifts. Now the realization hit. Their neglect had consequences. The woman they had undervalued had reclaimed her life and would not allow their previous behavior to affect her again. The grandchildren were confused, noticing that Grandma no longer called. Emily and Daniel struggled to explain. The kids were too young to fully grasp financial independence or emotional boundaries, but they sensed that something important had changed. Meanwhile, in Nassau, I began exploring ways to enrich my days further. I attended local cultural events, visited art galleries, and joined small groups focused on creative writing and painting. Each interaction was empowering. I felt valued for my ideas, for my presence, and for my passions, not for what I could give or do for someone else. I also started volunteering occasionally at a small senior community center, helping elderly residents in small ways. Reading to them, organizing arts and crafts, or simply sharing stories brought me a sense of fulfillment different from giving to my family. Here, my contributions were welcomed, appreciated, and reciprocated with friendship. One evening, as I returned to the condo after a long walk along the beach, I found a few emails waiting in my inbox. They were from Emily and Daniel, tentative messages filled with apologies, questions, and pleas for reconciliation. I read them carefully, savoring the clarity of my position. I did not respond immediately. I wanted to ensure that my next communication would reflect my boundaries, my values, and my autonomy. The power was mine to wield, and I would wield it thoughtfully. For the first time, I realized that my liberation was not just about distance from my family. It was about the ability to engage with them, or not, on my own terms. I could choose forgiveness, conversation, or silence. I could define the nature of the relationship. And that choice was mine wholly and irrevocably. The Nassau sun set in a blaze of orange and pink as I sat on the balcony, sipping tea and reflecting on the transformation. Decades of unacknowledged labor, invisible sacrifices, and emotional neglect had culminated in this moment. A life designed entirely by me for me. I thought of Emily and Daniel again. The letters had planted seeds of understanding and perhaps guilt. I wondered if they would ever comprehend the depth of what they had lost, or if they would continue to take for granted the possibility of reconciliation. But I realized something profound. I did not need their understanding to validate my worth. Their recognition was irrelevant to the woman I had become. I had reclaimed my identity, my freedom, and my life. And that, I decided, was more important than any apology, any attempt to explain, or any reunion. Grace, I reminded myself, had finally arrived, not as a mother or grandmother defined by others, but as a woman fully seen, fully respected, and fully alive. It had been 2 months since I settled in Nassau, and my life had blossomed into a rhythm of freedom and fulfillment. The balcony garden thrived, my paintings were filling the walls, and I had made friendships that nourished my soul. Yet the letters I sent home had left a ripple, a disturbance in Emily and Daniel's world that was inevitable. One sunny afternoon, I received a message from Emily, carefully worded and tentative. "Mom, we know we hurt you. Can we come visit? We want to make things right." I read it slowly, savoring the control I now had over the situation. For the first time, they were asking permission instead of taking for granted. My answer would be deliberate. A week later, Emily and Daniel arrived in Nassau. I had chosen a neutral location for the first meeting. A quaint seaside cafe, colorful flowers lining the patio, and the sound of waves in the background. I arrived early, wearing a soft beige dress and a calm expression. Gone was the anxiety that had marked so many decades of their carelessness. I was composed, elegant, and fully in control. Emily approached first, her eyes wet with emotion. "Mom, we're sorry," she whispered. Daniel stood beside her, silent but visibly tense. "We didn't realize, we were blind," he added. I nodded slowly. "I understand what you're saying. But understanding is not enough. Words without respect and actions without consistency have consequences." Emily's voice wavered. We've realized how much you've given us, how much we took for granted, and we want to make amends." I looked at them both steadily. Amends begin with respect. Amends begin with acknowledging the truth of past behavior. And most importantly, amends begin with understanding that my life is mine to live, not yours to control. We spent hours talking, but the tone had shifted. I was not pleading, explaining, or apologizing for my choices. I was asserting my autonomy. I spoke calmly, recounting the sacrifices I had made, the humiliation endured, and the love freely given. I described the letters they had received and my decision to reclaim control of my life. Emily and Daniel listened, shame and guilt written plainly on their faces. For the first time, they understood the consequences of neglect and disregard. They realized that I had always been strong, capable, and generous, but also finite. They had assumed endless patience and unconditional giving. I continued, "I will always love you, but love is not an obligation. My presence, my resources, my time, and my energy are not yours to exploit. I have spent decades giving freely and I will continue to give, but on my terms, with boundaries, and only where respect is mutual." The grandchildren watched quietly from a corner of the cafe, sensing the tension and the importance of this meeting. Emily explained gently, "Kids, Grandma has lived for herself now. She deserves our respect and attention, not just our requests." The children, young but perceptive, nodded. They understood that Grandma was not just someone to be entertained or helped. They began to see her as a person of strength and dignity. After the initial conversation, I outlined clearly what future interactions would look like. Visits would be scheduled, not assumed. Financial requests would not be entertained unless discussed and agreed upon. My time and energy would be respected. No last-minute demands or manipulations. Communication would be honest and boundaries would be acknowledged. Emily and Daniel listened intently, nodding, realizing that this was non-negotiable. The power balance had shifted permanently in my favor, not through anger but through assertion and clarity. Over the next days, I guided them gently but firmly, showing that reconciliation required effort, respect, and acknowledgement of past mistakes. Emily and Daniel began to understand that love alone was insufficient without regard for dignity and autonomy. Meanwhile, life in Nassau continued to flourish. I explored nearby islands, met more locals, and continued my creative projects. I hosted small gatherings at my condo, teaching painting classes to fellow retirees and exchanging life stories. My world was now filled with choice, joy, and meaningful connection, freely given and freely received. The empowerment I felt was intoxicating. For the first time in decades, I lived fully for myself. Every day was a celebration of autonomy, of liberation, and of the life I had earned. The past, The neglect, the humiliation, the emotional exhaustion was behind me. The future was mine to craft, vibrant and unbounded. And so I embraced it, fully, without apology. Months passed and my life in Nassau blossomed into something I had never dared to imagine. Every morning, I woke to the soft hum of waves and the golden light spilling across the balcony. I tended my garden, now flourishing with vibrant flowers and fresh herbs, their scents mingling with the salty breeze. Painting remained my daily ritual. Each day I chose a new subject, a street scene, a market vendor, or the ocean at dawn. My brush captured not just colors but the freedom I had long been denied. Each completed painting reinforced the reality: I was no longer living for anyone else. I was creating for myself fully and unapologetically. I also immersed myself in the local community. At the community center, I led small workshops for retirees who wanted to explore painting, writing, or gardening. Sharing my skills and stories with others who appreciated them filled a deep need I hadn't realized I had. Here, my experience, wisdom, and creativity were valued, not taken for granted. I joined evening walks along the beach with new friends, retired artists and writers, exchanging ideas and laughter. Each conversation, each connection reinforced my sense of belonging, not because I served others but because I was present, engaged, and respected. Financially, life was stable and liberating. The condo's rental income, combined with my investments, allowed me to live comfortably, travel when I wished, and pursue hobbies without constraint. Money no longer tied me to anyone else's expectations. It was a tool for freedom, not obligation. I started exploring small personal projects. A personal library filled with art, books, literature, and journals. A rooftop garden, perfect for early morning tea and sunset reflection. A watercolor and oil studio, allowing experimentation without pressure. Travel plans to nearby islands, soaking in new cultures and experiences. Every project reinforced autonomy and joy. Each day was a celebration of self-determination. Meanwhile, Emily and Daniel's occasional messages continued. They expressed regret and curiosity about my new life. I responded selectively, setting clear boundaries. I did not justify the past. I did not plead or argue. I communicated calmly and firmly, establishing that any interaction required respect and honesty. The grandchildren began to understand slowly that Grandma was a strong, independent woman. Their affection for me grew, not as someone who fulfilled obligations, but as someone they could admire, learn from, and respect. I began including them in small projects, sending them art supplies, encouraging them to write stories, and teaching them to garden via video calls. Each interaction was structured, meaningful, and free from exploitation. Socially, Nassau offered unexpected joy. I was invited to cultural events, local music performances, and small dinner parties. I made friends from diverse backgrounds, sharing stories of life, love, and independence. Conversations were reciprocal, enriching, and free from the emotional burden I had carried for decades. I learned to value my own preferences, desires, and pace. I no longer rushed to meet anyone else's needs before my own. I chose what to attend, whom to meet, and how to spend my time. Every choice was mine, and each choice brought satisfaction. Financial freedom also allowed me to explore travel. I visited neighboring islands, learning about local history, culture, and cuisine. Every journey reinforced the realization: my life was vast, rich, and fully my own. The world was open to me and I was free to step boldly into it. Reflecting on the past, I understood the transformation fully. The humiliation, neglect, and exploitation had been painful, but they had also taught me boundaries, self-respect, and the value of autonomy. I no longer feared being alone. I had learned that solitude, chosen freely, could be profoundly fulfilling. The letters I sent, the financial restructuring, and the move to Nassau had all been steps in claiming my life. I had demonstrated to my family and to myself that respect is earned and maintained through self-worth, clarity, and action. Evenings in Nassau were quiet and restorative. I sat on the balcony, watching the ocean reflect the sky's fiery sunsets. I sipped tea, tended my garden, or sketched, fully present and fully alive. The past existed only as lessons and memories, never as chains. I had discovered that true freedom comes not from wealth alone, but from autonomy, clarity, and self-respect. I had given decades of love, care, and resources. Now I gave to myself, and in doing so I flourished. Grace, once the overextended, invisible mother and grandmother, was now a woman fully awake, fully valued, and fully free. Months in Nassau had passed, and each day revealed more of the life I had longed for but never dared to claim. The ocean, the sun, the gentle warmth of tropical evenings, they all reminded me that I had arrived at a place where life belonged to me and only me. Sitting on the balcony one morning, journal in hand, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Every memory of sacrifice, humiliation, and unreciprocated love now took on a new shape. Lessons carved deeply into my understanding of self-worth. I thought of Emily and Daniel. For decades, I had been their anchor, their financial safety net, and the silent caretaker of their happiness. But in doing so, I had neglected the one person who truly mattered: me. The letters I sent and the steps I took to claim independence were not acts of revenge. They were acts of liberation. From them, I learned several fundamental truths. Respect cannot be assumed. It must be acknowledged and maintained. Boundaries are essential. Giving endlessly without limits leads to exploitation. Love is not obligation. Genuine love is reciprocal, not transactional. Autonomy is power. Owning your life, finances, and decisions is the ultimate form of freedom. Self-worth must be nurtured. Only when you value yourself can others value you. I decided it was time to send a final message to Emily and Daniel. A message that was firm, compassionate, and clear. Dear Emily and Daniel, I hope this message finds you reflecting on the changes in our family. My life in Nassau is flourishing. I am thriving, independent, and at peace. I wanted to ensure that you understand the boundaries that will guide any future interactions. Visits must be scheduled with respect for my time and autonomy. Financial support from me is concluded unless mutually agreed upon. Requests must be reasonable and communicated with honesty and respect. The relationship can grow only through mutual respect and genuine affection. I have learned that love without respect is hollow, and generosity without acknowledgement is hollow. My hope is that you honor these boundaries and understand the consequences of past neglect. My life is mine to live, and I intend to live it fully, freely, and joyfully. With clarity and resolve. Grace. Sending this message felt empowering. It was not anger that motivated me but clarity. The past had been honored, the lessons learned, and the boundaries established. I could now move forward without fear, guilt, or compromise. In Nassau, my days were filled with rich experiences. I explored hidden beaches, small local galleries, and quaint streets where history whispered from every corner. I found joy in creativity. Painting, journaling, even small culinary experiments in my kitchen. I hosted dinners and cultural exchanges with friends, discovering that connection could be fulfilling without obligation. I also pursued small volunteer projects at local senior centers. Helping others, I realized, was most rewarding when it was a choice, not a demand. The gratitude and respect I received here were healing in ways decades of family neglect could not provide. Financial independence gave me freedom I had never known. The condo's rental income, combined with careful investments, allowed travel, exploration, and personal enrichment. I invested further in hobbies, books, art supplies, and courses that stimulated the mind. Life was abundant not because of wealth alone, but because it was freely chosen, respected, and curated by me. Evenings were my favorite time. I would sit on the balcony watching the ocean reflect fiery sunsets. A cup of tea in hand, a sketchpad at my side, I reflected on the richness of life and the incredible journey I had undertaken. I realized that the humiliation, the neglect, and the exhaustion of decades past had been painful, but they had forged the woman I had become, strong, independent, and fully awake. I was no longer invisible, no longer a background figure in someone else's life. I was the author of my own story. One evening, as I watched the sun sink below the horizon, I smiled at the thought of the adventures still to come. Nassau was only the beginning. I had learned that freedom is not a destination. It is a mindset, a series of choices, and a commitment to self-respect. Life lessons crystallized in that moment. Joy comes from living authentically. Strength comes from boundaries. Peace comes from autonomy. Fulfillment comes from choosing how to give and whom to give to. And so Grace, once burdened, humiliated, and unseen, had arrived at a place of complete self-actualization. The past no longer defined me. The future was mine to create. With that, I closed my journal, sipped the last of my tea, and breathed in the warm Nassau air. A new chapter awaited, filled with promise, joy, and complete freedom. My story was no longer about sacrifice, shame, or invisibility. It was about living fully, beautifully, and deliberately. I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept, and I would accept nothing less than respect, freedom, and joy. Grace's journey was far from over. And for the first time in decades, I looked forward to every sunrise, every wave, and every opportunity with excitement and anticipation. Life in Nassau had become a symphony of choice, color, and freedom. Each day I awoke to the gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore, a reminder that this life was mine, fully mine, and no one could dictate its rhythm. I had established a daily routine that honored both body and mind. Mornings were spent in the balcony garden, watering hibiscus, pruning bougainvillea, and tending herbs. The scent of the flowers mingled with the salty ocean breeze, and I felt grounded in a way that decades of sacrifice and service had never allowed. Afterward, I dedicated a few hours to painting. My brushes captured the vibrancy of Nassau, the colorful streets, the tropical flowers, the play of sunlight on the ocean. Every stroke was a statement of independence, a declaration that I lived for myself now. Friendships flourished in this new chapter. Retirees, expatriates, and locals welcomed me into their circles. Together we explored hidden beaches, local galleries, and cultural events. Conversations were enriching and reciprocal. I discovered new perspectives, new stories, and new laughter that had been absent from my life for too long. I also joined a writing and painting collective. The group encouraged experimentation and expression without judgment. It was here I realized that creativity had been stifled for decades, not by lack of talent but by the demands of others. Now every idea could be explored, every project completed, every goal pursued. Volunteering remained a source of deep satisfaction. I assisted in senior community centers, organized small workshops, and occasionally mentored locals interested in the arts. Here, generosity was met with gratitude, not entitlement. My contributions were valued, and in return I felt a profound sense of purpose. Financial independence allowed me to travel to nearby islands, exploring culture, cuisine, and history. Each trip reinforced that life was vast and full of possibilities. The Nassau condo, a former inheritance I had neglected for years, became both home and a hub for friends, small gatherings, and celebrations of creativity. Emily and Daniel continued to reach out occasionally, always respectful, always seeking connection on my terms. I responded with kindness, clarity, and firm boundaries. Their recognition of past mistakes, though insufficient to erase the years of neglect, marked a beginning of accountability. I realized that my empowerment was not dependent on their actions. It was rooted in the choices I had made, the independence I had claimed, and the life I now lived fully. The grandchildren began to see me differently. Through scheduled video calls and shared projects, they witnessed a grandmother who was strong, independent, and full of life. They learned that respect and admiration were earned through character, not just gifts or attention. Watching them grow with awareness of boundaries and gratitude brought a quiet joy I had never anticipated. Evenings were sacred. I often sat on the balcony, tea in hand, journal beside me, watching the sky transform into fiery sunsets. I reflected on the life I had built, the lessons I had learned, and the freedom I now enjoyed. I documented my days in a journal, each entry a celebration of choice, creativity, and fulfillment. I wrote letters to myself, capturing thoughts, dreams, and reflections. These writings became a testament to the woman I had always been beneath the weight of unreciprocated care and silent sacrifice. Creativity, community, and self-determination defined every aspect of my life. I hosted small dinners for friends, taught art classes, and explored new hobbies with joy. I even began exploring photography, capturing moments of beauty and freedom to share with my growing circle. Through these experiences, I understood fully: happiness is not given, it is created. Freedom is not granted, it is claimed. Respect is not assumed, it is demanded through boundaries and self-worth. Financial security gave me the ability to plan for long-term projects. I invested in a small local art gallery, collaborated with other retirees, and funded workshops that encouraged creative expression. Each initiative was a statement of independence. My time, energy, and resources used to enrich my life and the lives of others, voluntarily, joyfully, and on my terms. One night, as the ocean shimmered under the moonlight, I reflected on the journey. From decades of sacrifice, humiliation, and invisibility, I had arrived at a place of complete autonomy and fulfillment. The letters to Emily and Daniel, the move to Nassau, and the reclamation of financial and emotional independence had transformed not just my life, but my understanding of self-worth. Grace, once burdened, overlooked, and undervalued, was now a woman fully awake, fully alive, and fully free. Every choice, every boundary, every creation was a testament to the life she had fought for and finally claimed. The horizon promised adventures yet unknown. Each sunrise was a reminder that life is vast, vibrant, and waiting for those brave enough to claim it. I was ready to meet every new day with courage, creativity, and joy. And in that realization I found the ultimate peace. The life I had always deserved was finally my own, and nothing could ever take it from me.